Hey nerds, what's up? It's time to talk about my 5 favorite books of 2021. Let's start in no particular order. To absolutely nobody's surprise, one of my favorite books of the year was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. If you're one of the 2 people who aren't sick of me talking about this book, congratulations, because it's all I've been talking about this year. I fell absolutely in love with this book. Unfortunately, this is a sort of book that the less you know going in, the better, so I won't say a ton. I did do kind of a spoiler review video earlier this year if you want to watch that if you've already read it. But what I will say is that I just fell in love with the ethereal magic that Clarke used, the mystery, and I fell in love with the main character. It was just one of those books that was one of the most unique reading experiences I had. It was just totally transported me to a new world. Overall, I think this is a book that can appeal to many readers. So whether you're new to adult fantasy or have been in adult fantasy for a long time, it's an extremely short book. I finished it in a single day. I couldn't put it down. So I really pretty much cannot say enough about this book. Please just go buy it and read it. Next up is a short story collection called The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu. So this is a short story collection. I'm always a big sucker for short stories, but one thing that's really important to me in loving a short story collection is that every story has to be a hit. I read a lot of short story collections where I really like 1 or 2 stories and I don't really like the others, or they're kind of mediocre. So this one really just delivered for me. One thing I really like about this collection is that it blends stories from sci-fi, fantasy, and magical realism. So there's a lot of variety, which makes the book very interesting to read because it's exploring so many themes and topics with very different genre backdrops. As you guys know, I've also been talking a lot about Ken Liu this year, period. I really love his Dandelion Dynasty, but if that feels like a lot of commitment because they're so long, this might be a good way to see if you like Liu's writing, if you like his themes in a very, non-committal way. This collection of short stories deals a lot with familial relationships, memory and collective memory as a species, and history, particularly the historical moments from China and Japan. So I always pick a few favorites. Even though I liked them all, I would say my favorites were the titular story, which was The Paper Menagerie, which did make me cry, which is pretty rare, but most people I've talked to, it made them cry. I also really liked State Change and Mono No Aware. I will warn you that this is not an easy collection of stories to get through. I did not realize this going in. They are all pretty devastating. There are a lot of heavy topics covered and a lot of very serious stuff. So just as a warning, if you're wanting a light-hearted read, this definitely isn't that, but it is excellent. Okay, so actually another short story collection made it into my top 5 this year, which is Exhalation by Ted Chiang. You might be actually familiar with Chiang's work if you've seen the movie Arrival. That was actually based on one of his short stories. That short story actually isn't in this collection, but another one that I read that was also excellent. I'm just trying to keep it easy. But this is a science fiction short stories, and I would definitely say this is hard science fiction. It's definitely in that sci-fi realm. Exhalation in particular, I feel like explores a lot of technological themes. Some of them are religious, some of them are others, but mostly technology. And it just really resonated with me, the stories. They're so unique, and every story made me think. Every story made me feel like I needed to talk to somebody about it, which is always something that's very appealing to me when I feel like it's making me think, it's challenging the way that I think. This was the sort of book that I actually immediately told my dad he needed to go read because we needed to talk about it. And I always just like when there's a book that I'm like, someone has to read this so I can talk to you about it. Chiang also does a really good job of being extremely chilling without using shock factor. So I felt like a lot of his stories were sort of, scary. That might not be the right word. They were unsettling, but not because he was trying to shock his readers. He didn't use kind of cheap tricks, which is something I really like. I pretty much liked every story in here, but my personal favorite was the life cycle of software objects. If you were only going to read one story, I highly recommend that one. I'm still thinking about it months later. Next up is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. Now, I read this as a part of the SPFBO winners video that I did where I read all those winners. So this is an indie book. If you guys already saw that review, you know this one absolutely blew me away. I loved it so much. I felt so connected to the characters in this story, and I just think it's probably one of the best portrayals of motherhood I have read in fantasy. The way that Wang gives voice to a lot of feelings of motherhood from different characters in a way that is non-judgmental, that presents different viewpoints, and also doesn't diminish that role, is just really well done. And the coolest thing about it is that that isn't just what this story is about, because that might make you like not want to read it. Like, this is a brutal war story. This has extremely grim scenes, but the exploration, it just makes it so rich and deep because you have so many facets to this story, and that is just something that completely took me in. I also felt that she wrote children very well and like very complicated emotions pretty well. So yeah, I was blown away. I will say this book does have a very unique pacing because the climax happens in the direct middle of the novel, and then the rest is falling action, which is a very different thing for a novel. I think it works extremely well here, but just kind of as a warning, it is paced differently, so you kind of know going in. I will say I was teary-eyed for like 100 pages in the middle of this book, so it really, that's what you'll notice about all of my top books, is that they made me feel something, because I don't often get like super teary or attached to books. It's just not really my personality. So when something can really tug at me and really make me feel something, that's when I feel like the book is really special. The last book on my top 5 favorites this year is Bad Blood by Carryrou. I do own this book, but it's really high up on the shelf and I was too lazy to get it down. So we're just gonna put it here. You guys have also been hearing me talk about this book way too much. This is a nonfiction book. So it's the only nonfiction one on the list. The rest were fantasy and sci-fi. And it is about someone named Elizabeth Holmes, who was a CEO in Silicon Valley in California, the United States of America, who defrauded everybody in like this healthcare business. She basically ran a sham company that became extremely famous, won a ton of awards, she made a ton of money. It just follows the story of how that came to be, the company name being Theranos. This book was insane. This book read like a thriller to me. The author is the journalist who actually broke the story, so it's super cool to hear all of his research and to hear it from his point of view. I couldn't get enough of this story. You guys all know I'm like following her trial. I did so much research after. There is a documentary. I do not recommend it just because I do not think it gives enough detail. Please just read the book. I promise you, it's unputdownable. It just is crazy that happened in the world. I've talked about this a lot. I've talked about it in other videos, so that's it. But just if you need a nonfiction, highly recommend. Okay, I'm also gonna cheat a little bit. I wanna do some runner-ups. There were some books that were really hard and I think just got edged out of my top 5, so I wanted to just like quickly go over them. So just as runner-ups to my favorites this year. First, we have Wall of Storms by Ken Liu. This is the second installment in the Dandelion Dynasty. You can hear my review on those in this video. I just wanted to mention, I thought this was a super, super strong second installment into the series, and I always like to talk about that, like when a first book is already good and then the second book is even better. This is worth your time, so definitely almost made my top. The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi. You guys have heard me talk about this book too, but I want to mention it. It's just a little novella. This is one I read in a couple of hours. If you want to try out her writing, I think this is the best one of all of her writing. I recommend it. It's just like a little fantasy novella, and I was just really taken in by the storytelling. The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. So this is the third installment in the First Law trilogy, and this, I guess, is just me pimping out the First Law trilogy. If you didn't think you'd like it, I think you should give it a try. One of the reasons this really makes my runner-ups was I really didn't think I was gonna like First Law. I went into First Law being like, I'm not gonna like this, it's not for me, I don't like grimdark, and I still don't think I like grimdark, just from what I can tell, but I like Joe Abercrombie. I just was so shocked. Like, it's very interesting that I could go in with such a negative view and come out really loving the series. I've done several talks about Joe Abercrombie's work, so you can look at those videos. I'll link them below if you want to know more. But yeah, I really loved The Last Argument of Kings, which was the final installment, but I liked the whole trilogy. So again, those were all fantasy, but I have one nonfiction runner-up, which was Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. This was such a good book, stats book. You know I love my statistics. I just have never read a book where I was like, yep, that's exactly how I feel. Yes, 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 yes. Like, everything they were talking about were things I had experienced, and it's really just talking about how the world is designed for men in ways we don't think about, just even like cars or bus systems. Just a very enlightening read, and several things, particularly the chapters on like motherhood and women in STEM, since those are two things that involve me, I found particularly illuminating because it spoke the statistics to what I had experienced, which was super interesting. So if you're interested in statistics and things like that, I highly recommend this book because I really enjoyed it. Okay, those are my top 5 books of the year with 4 runners up. I am super interested to know what your guys' top books of the year are so I can add them to my list. Obviously, let me know if you've read any of the books that I've listed in my top books of the year and what you thought of them, if you liked them like I did, or if they just did not hit for you. Let me know in the comments below. I always like to hear it. And if you like these sort of videos, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading as well as other nerdy rants, you can follow me on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.